Michael Harper's own backyard was seized under false claims by his HOA, leaving him facing fines and the threat of losing everything he owned. At the center of it all, Lauren Kane wielded her power with ruthless precision, manipulating records and enjoying the fear she inspired in neighbors. But Michael refused to surrender. With the help of attorney Emily Rogers, he uncovered hidden deeds and exposed the HOA's decade-long deception. And just wait until you see how the courtroom showdown unfolded and why justice in the end finally prevailed. Michael Harper had always thought of his little home in the Florida suburb as his personal haven. Nestled between neat lawns and rows of identical houses, his property felt like a sanctuary, a place where he could unwind after long days at his marketing job. He loved the subtle hum of the neighborhood, children playing, neighbors waving as they walk their dogs, the occasional barbecue filling the air with the scent of summer. His home wasn't extravagant, but it was his. Every flower in his garden, every corner of his backyard, he had tended with care. That peace shattered on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Michael stepped outside with his coffee, expecting the usual calm, only to freeze at the sight before him. There, slicing unnaturally across his backyard, a tall, freshly installed fence stood like an intruder. Its sharp edges and straight lines looked almost surgical, as if someone had decided to cut his property in half without asking. Panic and confusion struck him first. Had a neighbor gone mad? Was this some legal boundary adjustment he hadn't been informed of? As he rushed down to investigate, a letter slipped under his door the previous evening finally made sense, or at least he thought it would. The HOA, the Sunny Pines Community Association, had claimed a portion of his land. According to them, that section belonged to the community and now required him to pay monthly fees, effectively taxing him for the very property he had legally purchased years ago. Michael read the words over and over, each line burning into him with increasing disbelief. How could an organization take a man's land, the place where he had built his life, and simply claim it belonged to them? It was unthinkable. Anger welled up inside him like a storm. It wasn't just irritation. This was a visceral, almost physical rage. The principle of the matter struck him harder than the financial threat. This wasn't a small oversight or a harmless miscommunication. This was a direct challenge to his rights as a property owner. He could almost feel the audacity of the HOA's claim, the cold precision with which they had decided to cross a boundary without warning or dialogue. The idea that some committee of strangers, operating under a self-proclaimed authority, could dictate terms over what was legally his made his blood boil. And then there was Lauren Kane, the HOA president. Michael had met her only once at a community meeting. Even in a brief encounter, she had struck him as composed and unyielding, almost detached from the people she governed. Yet now he understood the extent of her influence. She seemed to relish her power. A woman comfortable in her position wielding rules and regulations like weapons. Michael imagined her behind a polished desk, shuffling documents, calculating fees, and ensuring the HOA maximized every advantage. There was no empathy in her eyes, no acknowledgement of the people who actually lived in the neighborhood. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was asserting control. The more he stared at the fence, the angrier he became. Every plank seemed like a taunt, every nail a declaration of ownership he had never consented to. His mind raced through the injustice. Months of taxes paid, years of maintenance, and now this. He felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted, as though the very law that was supposed to protect citizens had turned its back. How could such a claim exist in a country that prided itself on property rights and fairness? Michael's anger wasn't quiet. It demanded action, it demanded acknowledgement, and most of all, it demanded justice. Neighbors came out, curious about his agitation and the sudden appearance of the fence. Michael tried to explain, his voice rising with frustration and disbelief. Some nodded sympathetically, while others looked away, wary of crossing the HOA's shadow. In that moment, he realized the power of the system he was facing wasn't just legal, it was social. Lauren Kane's reach extended beyond paperwork. It had created a climate where people were afraid to question authority. That realization made his anger deepen. This wasn't merely a personal affront. It was a symbol of how easily rules could be bent by those who understood them best and enforced against those who didn't. Standing there, staring at what he once thought was an untouchable piece of his life, Michael felt the surge of a new determination. The fire of his anger didn't just consume him, it sparked a resolve. This fence wasn't just a boundary in his backyard, it was a challenge. And he was determined not to back down. He would confront the system, question every claim, and fight not only for his land, but for the principle that a person's home is theirs, and theirs alone. Michael's anger had transformed into a quiet, simmering resolve. The story of this fence, of the audacious HOA and its cold president, had only begun, and he was ready to face every obstacle in his path. After the initial shock and surge of anger faded, Michael Harper plunged into action. He gathered every piece of evidence he could find. Old property deeds, county survey maps, photographs of his backyard from years past, even emails and letters from neighbors referencing the original boundaries. He meticulously organized them, hoping that the facts would speak for themselves. But each letter he sent to the Sunny Pines Community Association went unanswered, or worse, was met with formal, coldly worded notices that ignored his evidence entirely. It was as if the HOA existed in a bubble where logic and fairness were irrelevant. Then came the letters from their lawyers. Michael had never imagined he would face a legal onslaught like this in his quiet suburban life. Each envelope brought new demands, fines, and escalating interest charges. The numbers on the pages seemed to grow overnight. a relentless avalanche threatening to bury him. It wasn't just money, it was the principle of the matter. How could an organization so small and obscure wield so much power over a single homeowner? The injustice was suffocating, and Michael felt it in every waking moment. As days turned into weeks, the pressure began to mount in ways he hadn't anticipated. His savings, painstakingly accumulated over years, began to dwindle under the weight of legal fees, fines, and mounting interest. Each month brought new anxiety about whether he could pay or if the HOA would push him closer to financial ruin. The sense of helplessness was almost tangible. He would sit at his kitchen table late at night, surrounded by stacks of documents and letters, and feel the oppressive weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The home he loved, the land he had nurtured and cared for, now felt like a battlefield. What made it even more isolating was the reaction of the neighborhood. Michael reached out to a few neighbors, hoping for advice or support, only to be met with cautious nods and hesitant glances. Many were afraid to speak up, intimidated by the HOA's reputation and the authority they wielded. The sense of community he had once cherished seemed to vanish. The familiar waves and smiles now felt distant. He was left standing alone, facing a system that seemed designed to crush anyone who questioned it. Each HOA meeting added another layer of frustration. Michael attended as often as he could, presenting his case, showing his documents, and asking questions. But Lauren Kane, the HOA president, appeared impervious to reason. She would sit behind her polished desk, poised and composed, with that same calm, almost smug expression he remembered from their first meeting. "We're just protecting the community," she would say, her tone light, but her meaning heavy. It was a statement that seemed designed to dismiss his concerns, as if the rules of Sunny Pines existed on an entirely different plane, untouchable by ordinary logic or fairness. Michael's anger resurfaced each time, but now it was coupled with an exhausting, gnawing despair. The nights were the worst. Michael would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's encounters and letters in his mind. The fear of losing his home, of being bankrupted over a dispute that shouldn't have existed in the first place, kept sleep at bay. Every imagined scenario seemed worse than the last. Receiving a foreclosure notice, having to sell the house he loved, explaining to his friends and family how something so unjust could happen in their own neighborhood. The mental toll was enormous. Anxiety gnawed at him constantly, leaving him exhausted but unable to rest. He began to feel the emotional strain in his body. The stress caused tension in his shoulders, headaches that came uninvited, and a lingering knot of worry that seemed to sit just above his heart. Michael realized that the battle with the HOA wasn't only legal or financial, it was a personal ordeal, testing his patience, resilience, and faith in fairness. Each day, he faced reminders that systems meant to protect people could also be manipulated to impose suffering. And yet, beneath the pain and exhaustion, a quiet spark remained. Michael knew the situation was unfair, and that awareness, as heavy as it felt, also became a seed of determination. The injustice was real, the obstacles were tangible, but the fight was not yet over. The next steps, he realized, would require careful planning, resilience, and perhaps allies who could help him navigate the complexity of HOA bureaucracy. Pain had become his teacher, showing him the stakes, sharpening his resolve, and preparing him for the battle that lay ahead. Though the nights were long and the worry relentless, Michael clung to that faint ember of hope. He had been knocked down by a system that seemed heartless, but he hadn't been defeated. And as the days stretched on, he understood that his struggle was not just about property. It was about dignity, principle, and the belief that fairness could prevail even in the most frustrating circumstances. The courtroom was filled with tension, a palpable energy that pressed down on Michael Harper as he took his seat beside Emily Rogers, his attorney and steadfast ally. For months, they had meticulously prepared for this day, combing through evidence, drafting motions, and rehearsing every argument. Now, as the trial finally commenced, every detail mattered. The walls of the courtroom seemed to echo with the weight of history, bureaucracy, and years of injustice. Outside, the sun shone over the quiet Florida suburb, a stark contrast to the storm that had been brewing within these four walls. Michael watched as Lauren Kane, the HOA president, entered the room, her posture as composed and confident as ever. She greeted the court with a measured smile, the same calm demeanor that had once unnerved him in meetings. But Michael was no longer the same man who had first encountered that fence in his backyard. Months of relentless investigation, nights spent poring over property deeds, and the steady guidance of Emily had transformed him. He sat upright, focused, and prepared, ready to confront not just the opposition, but the injustice itself. The trial unfolded with a tension that seemed to stretch endlessly. Witnesses testified, some recounting past interactions with the HOA, others offering expert analysis of property lines and land records. Emily presented the evidence with clarity and precision, unraveling the web of manipulated documents and hidden correspondence that the HOA had relied upon for over a decade. Each revelation caused subtle shifts in the courtroom, furrowed brows, whispered conversations, and glances exchanged between board members. Michael felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety, knowing that the outcome still hung in the balance, dependent on the careful consideration of the judge. Throughout the trial, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the nights of despair, when the weight of fines and legal threats felt unbearable. He recalled the isolation, the doubt, and the frustration at seeing neighbors hesitant to confront the HOA. Each memory fueled his resolve. This trial was not just about reclaiming property. It was about reclaiming dignity, asserting the principle that truth and fairness could prevail even against entrenched authority. Then, after days of testimony, arguments, and cross-examinations, the courtroom fell silent as the judge began to read the verdict. Michael felt his heartbeat quicken, the room shrinking to a narrow focus on the words that would determine the outcome of years of struggle. The judge's voice was steady, deliberate. Every action taken by the Sunny Pines Community Association regarding Michael's property had been illegal. Every fine, every demand for payment, every alteration of records had been overturned. Lauren Kane and the HOA were ordered to compensate Michael fully, including all fines, legal fees, and additional damages for the undue stress caused by their actions. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Relief surged through Michael's body, a wave of emotion so intense that he could barely process it at first. Tears came unbidden, a release of months of pent-up tension, anxiety, and fear. Emily squeezed his hand, her quiet smile reflecting the triumph of careful preparation and relentless persistence. Outside the courtroom, word spread quickly. Neighbors who had once been intimidated by the HOA's authority began to see that fairness could prevail, that one determined individual could stand against what had seemed like an unstoppable force. Returning home, Michael walked through his property, touching the fence that had once symbolized oppression. It now felt different, diminished in significance by the knowledge that truth and justice had prevailed. He envisioned the future differently. His garden, his backyard, the space that had been his sanctuary, restored not just physically, but symbolically. His struggle had become more than a personal victory. It was a statement, a story to inspire others facing similar challenges. Over the following weeks, Michael's story spread throughout the neighborhood. People shared it quietly at first, in conversations over fences or at community events, and then more openly as courage and admiration grew. He became an example of what determination, patience, and strategic action could achieve. Ordinary people, he realized, could effect extraordinary change if they refused to accept injustice. The story resonated not only with homeowners, but with anyone who had felt powerless against bureaucracy or seemingly heartless authority. For Michael, the triumph was deeply personal, yet the inspiration it generated felt universal. It wasn't about vengeance or spite. It was about the restoration of fairness and dignity. The experience left him with a renewed faith in perseverance and the power of informed, thoughtful action. He understood that the system, while flawed, could be held accountable, and that courage, coupled with careful preparation, could bring about meaningful change. As he stood in his backyard one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Michael felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The trials had ended, the legal battle had been won, and the injustice had been rectified. More importantly, the story of his struggle had inspired others to believe in their own power to stand up, to speak out, and to insist on what was right. Michael Harper had faced fear, pain, and intimidation, and emerged not only victorious, but as a symbol of hope and resilience.